What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another Fantasy Fuck video. I'm your host Mike, and today I'm going to give you 5 strategies to help you win your fantasy leagues. Whether you're in last place, in the middle part of the standings, or in first, these 5 strategies are easy ways to help you win your fantasy leagues. Before we get into this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, and check out our video description to get access to all of our content channels. Without further ado, let's jump into the 5 strategies to help you win your fantasy leagues. The first strategy to win your leagues is constantly setting your lineups each night. This seems super obvious, but not enough people do it, especially those who are in last in your fantasy league. Every night, go on your phone, it takes 2 minutes, quickly set your lineups. People that are on Yahoo, you have the start active players button where you can start players for the entire week. If you're not starting players each week, you're not going to accumulate points and you just won't win. Some people get really lazy. I get it. We all have busy lives, but just spend an extra 2 minutes to set your fantasy lineups. There's going to be nights where you have an entire roster playing and you're going to find it kind of difficult to figure out who to put in, who to sit out. Just base it all on matchups, teams that you know are bad, teams that you know are good, and swap your players in and out. Some players could be riding hot streaks, some players can be coming off injuries. There's many variables you have to take into account, but make sure at all times you're starting the best possible players. For players that are at the top of the league, just make sure you're continually setting your lineups. It seems like such an obvious answer, but not enough people do it. The next strategy to help you win your fantasy leagues is strategically starting your goaltenders. You're going to find that you're going to have goalies in really tough matchups. Even though you drafted them and they were really good for you the entire season, sometimes it's better to just sit them and hopefully save your goals against average and save percentage numbers. A good example is starting Thatcher Demko. He's a pretty good goaltender, but he's playing on the road against Colorado. You're probably better off not starting him in case it's a 7-1 blowout, and that's what we've seen this year, especially for me in my fantasy leagues. Thatcher Demko has killed me a few times on Vancouver, just in really tough matchups, and I'm at the point where I'm just going to sit him in the really hard matchups and start him in the easy ones. For some of you, you might be in a league where you need minimum goalie starts. I'm definitely in leagues like that. So if you're forced to start Demko in a tough matchup, you're forced to start Demko in a tough matchup, and that's just how it's going to be. You definitely want to look to see if you can stream any goaltenders. Mostly starters start around 70% of the time, so there is a 30% window there where you can pick up a backup in a solid matchup and stream them for a night and hopefully get the win and some better save percentage and goals against average numbers. A good example is Ville Husso on St. Louis. He's playing at home against the Seattle Kraken. It's a really favorable matchup for him on a team that's really good defensively. It's going to be a really good time for you to stream him, hopefully get a win, and help out your save percentage and goals against average. The third strategy is to not sell out after a few weeks. You might have started off 1-4 in your fantasy leagues and you're looking along your roster and saying, wow, my team is really underperforming, and that happens in fantasy. Everybody goes through rough patches, especially in fantasy, and if your players are struggling, don't try and trade them away right away. Understand the value that your player holds and don't sell low on them. A player like Mark Scheifele has been struggling the first half of the season, but you took him in the 4th round. Understand the value that Scheifele holds and make sure you're not trading him for someone like Troy Terry, who was a waiver wire target. Scheifele has a long-term value and can really help your fantasy team once he starts picking it back up again. I've seen this time and time again with fantasy owners. Stay true to your draft, stay true to your players, and eventually things will turn around. The 4th strategy to implement is to actively try and buy low on players. Some fantasy owners get complacent, especially with their higher draft picks that are struggling, and it's important for you to try and look and trade for these players. A good example is Mark Scheifele this season. He was drafted in the 3rd and 4th round and has been really bad. He did deal with injury in the early part of the seasons and then had COVID. So Scheifele's kind of off to a slow start, but his historic value has shown that he's been a really strong point producing player. And if you can buy low on Scheifele, it'll really benefit your team in the long term. Being able to identify players that'll sell high targets fairly early will definitely give you a boost when you trade for buy low targets. All you need to do is get a solid few buy low targets, and if you successfully trade for them, you can easily win your league in the long run. Remember guys, fantasy is a marathon and not a sprint. The final strategy to implement to help you win your fantasy leagues is to actively stream players. This is a strategy learned from fantasy baseball where you just pick up a pitcher that's playing that day and drop them the next night. This is something that is really effective, especially on given nights where you don't have players starting. You can just look at your waiver wire for players that are playing, acquire them, and then put them in your starting lineup. Sometimes you can actually find long-term value in some of these acquisitions. A good example is Matt Duchene early in the season. I streamed him for one night. He did really well, so I kept him on my roster for a few more days, and he's now a long-term player on my roster that I start almost every night he plays. Remember, you're going to need a roster spot in order to stream players, so if you need to drop someone that's been struggling in order to have a streamer spot in your team, it's definitely worthwhile to do so. Look at your matchup throughout the week and see what you're lacking in. If you're losing in hits and shots, all you got to do is just go and look on the waiver wire, who's projected to play for that night, or maybe a few nights ahead, that's been getting a lot of hits and shots, and just play them for that week to help with your support numbers. Thank you for watching our mid-season strategies video. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.